Hello, Vladimir. A rather rich week, a lot of things entangled, and I don't think we can proceed without your input. Before we go talk about economy overall, tell us more about Belousov, the new appointee to Russian Minister of Defense. Do you share the excitement of pro-Putin's Z channels? And even some on the liberal side are saying that Belousov is a fantastic person, that he might actually fix things around. Or do you know him from another side? So tell us more about new Minister of Defense. Hello, hello. Yes, we do have a lot of things to talk about. I indeed know Belousov for quite a while, for over 20 years. He was actually consulting government since 1990s in Russia. And there are two sides to his persona. On one side, he has serious professional qualities. He created that special center for macroeconomic analysis and short-term prognostication back at the end of 90s, which generally better than most can calculate macroeconomic trends and knows industries. But this is core in mathematics, digits, numbers, so like a proper economic department, planned economic department in a big organization or a big company. But being a good mathematician does not mean being a good economist. And I can advertise a little bit here. We are filming a video about him for my channel, but briefly, he has some not just bugs in his visions in his mind about certain things, but more like very exotic bugs, because he's like one of those dinosaurs who still believes in the government planning, in the federal centralized planning system that Soviet Union proved to be bankrupt. He still believes that government can control a lot of key economic processes. And if we summarize it, he's been taking key economic positions under Putin for about 16 years. Remember when Putin left to be a prime minister in 2008? He was the head of economy and finance in his government. He was coordinating all economic policies back then. That's when those national projects were born that Putin runs around with now. And people are still waving those May declarations from Putin from those times. Those were his ideas. Oh, those ones that are 12 years old, right? Yeah, they're 12 years old, and right, and they still have not come to fruition. Exactly. This is his child. National projects, import replacement, that's all his ideation. Wait, then how come he is a great economist? Because as far as I know, import replacement is where, how should I say more correctly, where the sun doesn't shine. 12 years to implement some orders is also too much, especially given that they have not led to any fruition. Right, and I will give another teaser from the video we're making. I'm showing Russian GDP 10 years ago, and today, in dollar equivalent, it hasn't grown. In dollar equivalent, it's the same, despite of all these Belousov's national projects. I think one doesn't need to be an advanced economist to understand that things do not work. The key point in this story is that a lot of people, they can be enchanted when they see somebody who wields mathematics professionally, who's a good engineer. So our Russian cargo cult is Putin dropping numbers at different meetings, hoping numbers would enchant the audience. So this fellow knows a lot about every gas station, remembers numbers, but look at the speeches and you understand that he still doesn't dig the core of it. He doesn't understand that. I think many of you have similar acquaintances who are brilliant, who got brilliant mathematics or engineering inclinations, but yet they still think that the world is run by Soros and reptiloids. This is Belousov for you. And I will talk about that in more details in that another video, but besides his very detailed knowledge of facts, the upper structure of his worldview is not only decoupled from reality, but actually had been proven bankrupt in history of humanity, and attempts to build planned economy didn't really bring much fruition to those who tried to implement it. And likewise, in the last 15 years, he has not performed or proved any good results out of it. I'm glad we're coinciding here with you, Vladimir, because that's what I was thinking too. I understand what Putin's plan is, right? I share your opinion that he put economists there that needs to fix and optimize and shrink the expenditures and make it work. But I understand the plan. But the other question is whether it's executable. And that's where I usually diverge with most of these analysts this week, because I'm looking retrospectively at his achievements, and I don't think him to be some advanced strategist or achiever. Moreover, I'll ask you another question. If you're saying he's a government planner, somebody who tries to centralize and plan it from the center, I would pose a question here. Is it not lack of government planning and presence of free market that actually helped Russia to survive so long under this inflation and under the sanctions? Right. And I think the space of private entrepreneurship, that even though it's shrinking in Russia, it is the thing that allowed the country to stay afloat. And he implemented tens of different projects, but I'm yet to understand and find one of them, a single of them, that allowed to provide for economic growth in Russia. Yet there is no economic growth in Russia since 2008, when all these initiatives actually took off. You know what? I think this is an effect of unexpected new step that impressed people. Not many were expecting that appointment to happen. And Belousov indeed has certain personal strong traits. He does know numbers well. And I was also gauging him back in 2017 in rather much details when I started conducting a stream about money on Navalny Life. I was talking about Belousov quite a while. And some of my viewers still probably remember that. But here we have two groups. First is a group of economists who respect him as a very high-quality mathematician, and they respect him for that. And the other group who does not know anything about him. And they're thinking that Putin could not have done that just blatantly out of the blue. So he might have calculated something. Right, it's about the mythology of the leader. Exactly. But not a single multi-step plan ended well for Putin. Remember, he brought troops to Syria to pacify his relations with world society at large, world community, had he? And there's a ton of examples like that. Right. And there are a lot of interesting things that are hidden behind the discussion of his personality. I would also pay attention to a few other things that are happening in parallel with that. Chemizov's empowerment, crazy empowerment in Putin's group, because I want to say a day before that, before the appointment, he met with Chemizov and Manturov. Manturov is appointee of Chemizov, and he took the place of Belousov in government, and he became first deputy prime minister. Who is that? That's basically the first minister above any other minister. That position was previously taken by Belousov, and now Manturov is in this position. And Putin was essentially discussing the work of the future cabinet with Chemizov and Manturov without Mishustin, the head of the government, or Belousov. You can go to the Kremlin site and find these interesting details. I would also say that new Minister of Industry and Trade is Alekhanov, the ex-governor of Kaliningrad, who is also appointee of Chemizov. And the committee of Russian Duma, the legislative body, who approves all that, is also led by Putinov, who was an ex-deputy of Chemizov again. So imagine Chemizov's successful lobbying, right? And on Friday, RBC published an interview of Chemizov to the maximum, like a very bold owner. That's what he sounds like. He supports our numbers. First of all, that we talked about, that about 2/3 of military budget is military production. And over half of that money goes to Russian technology, Rostech. And over a half of that production order goes to Rostech. You can look up official numbers. This was 6 and something trillion rubles for last year. Rostech got 2 trillions out of this amount. This is 30% of all the military budgets of Russia for production. 30% went to Rostech. And I think this year it will even increase from there. And you need to consider one more thing, that 60 or 70% of military budget goes to military production. 20% meanwhile, is going to salaries, so monetary remuneration for employees. Here, Belousov does not have a maneuver. He has to pay that. So, a question. I hear all these conversations that Belousov will come and make things orderly. The field of his independent getting things to order is remaining 10-15% of military budget that goes for logistics and some other things. And I looked in very much detail that part of his speech in the top-level council recently, right? Oh yeah, the one that they published, exactly. And he sounds like a minister of logistics, not the minister of defense. He talks about supplies, about logistics, about social payments that are not coming on time. And the third, that reveals another problem, he talks about a screaming problem in military education. So they're probably running out of officers and they want to expedite, to speed up the preparation path. So he mostly emphasizes that. Once again, they did reappoint Gerasimov to Central Command, given that Belousov doesn't have military experience. Well, yeah, they did not really reappointed him, right? They just did not delete him, did not remove him. Exactly. So Belousov will not be able to go under that hood. He doesn't know the actual warfare. And a lot of military production goes to Chemezov, very well lobbied, that will be probably untouchable for him as well, that budget. And here people are coming saying that he will be figuring things out, he'll make things better, but within remaining 15% of monies in the overall budget, that only shines the light on him maybe being enhancing Putin's military logistics. That's about it. And by the way, he did mention during his recent statement that monetary compensations for officers and everybody in the defense industry is enough. So that already tells that he's not going to increase salaries. So if you're an officer in Putin's army, here's a note for you. Do you think you're getting an adequate salary? Because Belousov is saying you're not getting any increases. And there are a lot of contradictions internally that you can notice. For example, in the interview to RBC, he says, Chemezov says that military production is not profitable. He talks openly about that. And I foresee that in the future. I should not run there too much down this rabbit hole, but I see a possible conflict on the model of Serdyukov. Oh, absolutely. I so agree with you. I think there'll be such a clash between military and economists' attempts to optimize them. And given that is going to be happening during the times of hot war, I personally am actually delighted about this appointment, especially now when half of Shoigu's deputies are in prison who were sitting on these corrupt money flows. They put his main HR, he's put Ivanov, the guys who were taking most money, cadre in construction, do not have their frontmen. So I think there'll be some struggle about these two money flows as well. And I do not see a scenario under which something in Russian army will become better with Belousov's arrival. I see a big clash of clans coming here under the guise that Belousov is an economist, right? What he will be doing, he'll be optimizing, he'll be cutting costs, exactly. Well, see, exactly, Michael. We've went through that several times. People, unfortunately, have very short memory. We went through that in times of Serdyukov, another minister of defense. What was the story about? He started to optimize a lot of costs and things related to extra expenditures, for which the military pushed back rather heavily. Who are you? Have you even held a rifle in your hands? And now it'll be season 222 of the same show. Belousov has no authority to cut costs in the military, in the army. So they will be resisting. And on this backdrop, we see that the main part of military budget still goes to military-industrial complex, where Chemezov has empowered himself. He is saying openly that his profitability is zero. He has direct access to Putin and puts tasks in front of Belousov. And with this, Belousov will have to also clean up a lot of the corrupt routing systems set up by Shoigu during the 12 years of his leadership. So it won't be a task for 1 year, right? Well, right, they arrested and removed a few heads, but he doesn't have his own people to put there because he doesn't have his people, not in the military, right? He is a graduate from laboratories, right, from a scientific laboratory environment, and from there he lands a minister's position in defense. To compare him with Shoigu, his predecessor, he had two experiences, right? So first he brought Ministry of Emergency Situations people to the military, and then he also brought corrupt leadership from Moscow region. And Belousov doesn't even have that. So this is going to be messy, not as a soccer player, but as an English word describing the situation. And that's why I have a very good attitude to this step. I think this is the gesture of despair because he put a person into that position maximally removed from the current system. And he tried that before. Serdyukov, by the way, that fellow we referred to, he could at least, he had some influence. He could implement some changes. And yeah, indeed, Serdyukov managed to end some of the corruption. The bullying ended in the military under him, but he was devoured by generals later. And that was happening during peace times, not in conditions when you need equipment on the front yesterday. And I'm trying to look at the basic example. Just, imagine that. Front keeps changing. You need always new things there. Yesterday they need some grills on the tanks. Today they need radio electronic interference systems. Tomorrow they're going to look for ways to protect their oil refineries. So that's on a daily. And now imagine federal planner as an optimizer. Do you think bureaucracy under government planned system decreases or increases? I have a feeling and strong suspicion that all the bureaucracy will actually increase, and that process of implementation will actually lengthen, so it will become some sort of a lengthier mechanical apparatus that will not even be fully functioning. So I was reading, thank you for your supporting your opinion with your opinion here, because I was reading a lot of publications this week and thinking that perhaps I'm an idiot who doesn't understand anything. I'm glad to find that you see it in the same light. Right, Michael. So we are in a phase of hot war, right? We don't know if these reforms will work, will not work. We don't know how the war will end. And at this moment, to start optimization, what is optimization at its core? It's breaking, it's slowing down things, right? It's optimizing, making on less. If you recall Russian messages during war times, everything for the front, everything for the victory, right? Those slogans. That's how you try to win the war. You do not optimize things. Because as a bureaucrat who worked in government, I've seen that quite a while. And the moment optimization starts, everything freezes. Because you get auditors who start looking at the processes, and while they're reviewing all that, everything is frozen. People are afraid to act, people slow walk their decisions. So I'm looking at all that. I got my co-host that jumped on my table. Hello, Kitty. And I'm looking at all these things unfolding, and I have serious concerns about the future of Putin's defense. Right. Thank you, Vladimir. I hope we are more correct than all these praisers of Belousov. Let's look at other events that were happening in Russian economy besides appearance of a new Minister of Defense. Oh yeah, a ton of things were happening. Let's start with Putin's visit to China. Before he arrived there, I was reading gigabytes of analysis that everything is so fantastic between Putin's Russia and China, that the partnership is strong, he will go there and bring something from it. And we can look up the results just looking at the headlines of the videos on the RBC. Friendship with China, where is profit? And I have not seen such a fiasco for quite a while. You know that Russia has a lot of monetary transactions blocked with China because of secondary sanctions, especially in electronics. Not a word about that. We don't even know if Putin asked Xi about that, but there are no decisions coming out. No Chinese investments, no Chinese money coming to Russia. Nobody is giving Russia credit. The force of Siberia too, he didn't even take Miller with him because it's actually probably good. Because we know that de facto the export of natural gas to China is not bringing profit. So if anything, China is helping us to bring Putin's government down by buying his natural gas at such low prices that do not bring profit to Putin. But regardless how much he runs around with that power of Siberia too, it doesn't quite work for him. So What else is there? They signed 11 documents, some minuscule phytosanitary agreements that probably deputy minister could have signed, and by email. One of the most impressive was China opening its market to some Russian root of mandragora or something. Oh yeah, topinambar, right. That was a funny story. I would remind here that Belousov gave an interview last year to Kommersant media, where he acknowledged that Chinese market is closed for Russian goods. And many people perhaps were expecting some breakthroughs from Putin in China, but in vain. And in the economic sphere, I want to say that this visit is so loud speaking that China does not appreciate Putin at all. They do not value him high. It's been 2 years since he invaded Ukraine, and we understand what he needs from China. He needs technology, he needs credit, he needs China to be buying Gazprom natural gas at a better price. Nothing. What we see is a lot of frozen payments, especially in high tech. 80% of payments are blocked with China. I think it's a very despicable position for Putin, and I think it needs to be talked more about. People do not understand how much of a fiasco his visit is. Well, listen, Vlad, but visually there was a good picture. They had a big delegation, new axis, Russia and China. The West should be afraid. Have you got a whiff of that, maybe? Well, here's the thing, that a lot of things that Putin is doing today, including recent changes in the government, from the point of view of public relations, is some operation to cause that inflatable toads choir, to make sure they scream how genius Putin is, that he outplayed everybody. But the problem is, if you look at the core, they've signed less amount of document with this visit than he brought ministers with him. Just seriously, look, there's a protocol about phytosanitary control. I don't even want to talk about that. This is ridiculous. This is so minuscule. Just once again, read everything that all the analysts were writing in the last month, especially the ones who were saying that Putin relations with China are fantastic, and they were promising, not even for months, actually for years, that there'll be some breakthroughs. One would think that for the first time in a long period, Putin has visited China, and if there would be any breakthroughs, they should be happening right now. Well, the fact that they probably had a good drink together, I do not doubt, but this is not an economic breakthrough. Do you think there could be, Vlad, some secret economic cooperation that was maybe signed behind the closed doors? Good question, Michael. I do not exclude that there could have been some secret military component to that visit, and Putin indeed would probably be very much for having such a component. But we will know that by getting more data from the front, from perhaps some equipment broken and damaged with Chinese markings. And Americans have been warning China for a while. If that happens, China already suffers from certain repercussions and other limits by United States. Recently, Biden announced additional increase on Chinese electric vehicles imports. If we start seeing anything with Chinese markings in market quantities, there'll be more economic measures against economic sanctions against China. And we discussed before that China is not in an easy place to easily weather additional sanctions or slaps from Europe or United States. I may be wrong once again. We should be following that for some time, but there is a very easy way to track that. Just follow the information from the front to see what's happening there. And we'll see if anything transpired. Okay, do not forget to click the like button, to share your opinion at the bottom, and subscribe to our channels. That all helps us to bring this economic review to more people. And since it is economic review, do not forget to support our channel if you can. And go click the subscribe button, send a super thanks if you can, and we will continue further with Vlad about Russian economy. All right, another interesting story about the budget deficit. It jumped again. In April, they dropped over 4 trillion rubles of budgetary expenses, and deficit exploded again and has grown to 1.5 trillion rubles. So that's about 93% of the planned, from what is planned for this year. Right, they're reaching that same number rather fast. I think we saw about a month and a half ago, they were already storming the 90% ceiling. Right, in February. So what the optimists will be saying now, they'll be saying that this is like last year. They'll be saving as much as they can till the last month. Now they basically placed some orders in advance, and after that they'll be diminishing the deficit. But if we remember last year, this economy was well fought for. And at the end of the year, the deficit was above the planned level. And this all creates a lot of strain for the budget. So this is not about the deficit that appeared in April, that it will finish his regime or stay like that. They will try to diminish the deficit amount, but it shows how difficult of the problem is. They already, during the first months or the first quarter of this year, they already are at the top allowed deficit for this year. So they're approaching very closely to those live money, whatever is left of fund for national security. So it highlights that it's not everything has fallen and crumbled, but they are trying to balance, and it gets more and more difficult. They're failing to balance it better to any profit. And that April influx of money, it also caused significant inflation in the country. By the way, let's probably talk about inflation right now. It has been a record one through the last couple of months. It was 0.17% over the last week, and in annual, it will probably be closer to 7.91%. So I don't know where they're seeing deflationary processes. The stats are not showing that, not supportive. Our traditional weekly hit parade of different prices, they keep increasing for all kinds of goods. Beets are going somewhere to space with 71% growth since the end of December. And you can see more that our ex-champions, eggs and cucumbers, they have gotten cheaper. But regardless, on the main groups of goods, the growth of prices is significant. Last Monday, Central Bank published a resume about refinance rate, what were they discussing at the end of April, and one can see that they don't want to lower it. There are no reasons to lower it now. There were more serious discussions about increasing it in the future. So overall balance of risks remains to be pro-inflationary. And what is most important, that one can see that because of these budgetary influxes of money, central bank only sees more reasons and more risks to increase the rate. So most likely they will be increasing it, and that creates another problem. That's why Chinese money would generally be good for Putin, but China is not giving it. Because central bank published their discussions of possibility of serious increase of rate in the future. The profitability of the federal loan bonds has increased, and Ministry of Finance refused to place it. And that's one of the tools they use to get money, to raise funds. They place it on the internal market, and they borrow it at pretty high percent rate. Last time they were borrowing at 13.5%, and that also adds additional amounts to servicing this debt, and they don't have these monies. So despite having a sharp need to get these loans and this money to cover the budget, they actually refuse to even place it. That's how difficult it is for the budget. And they cannot afford themselves these additional expenses. So they are bracketed from different angles, and here's a deficit on one side, refinance rate increase on the other side. And yeah, I think they will find a way out of it, but every time with every new review that we publish, it appears to be more and more difficult for them to find a way. Gasoline, we also see the continuous attacks on the oil refineries, and we can see that on the chart that production of gasoline is still at low, it's at minimum level. It's about 15 to 16% lower than the February. So the conclusion from this is that the refineries that Ukrainians managed to disable, they failed to bring them back to work. And the whole story indeed is rather effective. So looking at these numbers, one can make a conclusion that the most damage was done to advanced refineries, high-octane gasoline's production, because production of diesel fuels fell just a little bit, only by 4% at the end of February. That means that the basic refining is still happening, but high-octane refineries that provide high-level cracking, and they are the ones damaged. But if that story continues, the strain on the inner market will remain. And by the way, very interesting numbers getting published by International Energy Agency. In April, Russia exported 400,000 less barrels of oil. Is it a lot or a little? That's rather notable, Michael. Let me give you a percent equivalent. It's about, compared to, let's say, March, it's about 6 to 8% decline over month. So this is notable. And in this story, one can see that prohibition on gasoline exports, they do work, but we'll see how that unfolds later. A lot of that would be depending upon new strikes on the oil refineries. They achieved a certain ledge, but it would be interesting to see if they can break through and get more damage. We've seen in the recent news that also Tuapse facility was attacked, Tuapse refinery, but this is the one that's aimed at the international supplies. It's not aimed on the internal Russian supplies. So it plays some role, but it's not going to affect the bigger picture. Nizhny Novgorod, Volgograd, Tatarstan, Bashkortostan, those attacks were most fruitful. What else we do have here? Despite the inflation not being stopped at its current rate, as we discussed here before, we see some signs of the economy cooling down in Russia. So inflation still rages, but with the high level of refinance rate, they're killing the economic activity in the country. And Belousov's Macroeconomic Analysis Center, by the way, is publishing these signs that the economy is slowing down. For example, if you look at the load of the railroad network, it's been in decline for the last 6 months. And RBC Investments also acknowledged that the economy was overheated. What is being overheated? That's when you inject additional money into the economy, but the production fails to catch up to that because they cannot create proper investment climate. They cannot create companies that would be effectively replacing imports. Right, and military industry does not really produce anything for the economy. Indeed, military industrial complex is not replenishing the economy at large. And the salaries they get increased in the military industries, it does not. They do not affect much. They go to the consumer market and just heats up the inflation. So production fails to catch up with more money being thrown in the market, and it becomes more and more obvious while we listen to these conversations that Putin created some military economy. I'm looking at the numbers, and even that macroeconomic center acknowledges that military complex fails to pull the rest of the economy with it. That bringing more money and dumping more money into the military production just creates more inflationary processes, but does not create additional economic chains. And at the end, all the military production just gets wasted in Ukraine, and that doesn't affect the economy at large in the long term in Russia in any positive way. You know, Vlad, I'm surprised that all of the bureaucrats of the current Kremlin are saying that we should not repeat the story of Soviet Union that fell, as many people estimate, due to economic reasons, but they're doing everything exactly, just naturally as it was done in USSR. We have increased military-industrial complex, just like the Cold War times, that only consumes resources, doesn't really produce anything good. Then we have economy drifting towards the government planning or some sort of macro government planning concept. We have nationalization of companies that's going rapidly in different districts. And this is exactly what Soviet Union was based on. And the only thing left is to appoint the exchange rate for the currency by decree and not let market interfere, and you'll be right there. Good observation, Michael. I also suggest our viewers to listen to the interview of Chemezov to RBC recently. He was asked a question that in the 80s, when the whole Soviet Union collapsed, they are giving a quote by Gorbachev that he was told that there'll be either guns or butter. an old economic dilemma. And Gorbachev says that, well, let's try to have both guns and butter. So he tried to both. And Chemizov acknowledges that and kind of agrees with Gorbachev of perestroika times. Yes, let's try to do both. Well, we did try that hundreds of times before, and they still think that they will find a way to get through this needle. And Chemizov is the person defining this Kremlin politics. And he says, yes, we will somehow manage to fit into this bracket. I don't see how. But you look at the numbers and you can see that I'm more right than he is. And Russian Stat just declared that the growth of GDP in the first quarter was 5.4%. Supposedly a good number, right? But with that, we see that in real sector of economy, there are only problems. And besides this hyper-expanded military sectors, nothing is growing. And all these dumping of extra funds only leads to additional inflation that slows future growth, future investments. Central bank increases their refinance rate, credit become unaffordable. I guess you can raise a glass for 5.4% in the first quarter, but overall, if you look at the real economy, it doesn't fly. It doesn't. You can see that it's not real, and you can see also that they know what are they doing. And both Putin and Chemizov, they're returning to that same topic. They are starting apologizing, saying that, well, we're not like Soviet Union. Of course, you're not, right. The only thing that saves them is that they still have a rather strong private economy in the country that somehow manages to deal with it. USSR did not have it. Right, so Nabiulina and Silanov's private economy, if one can say that, yeah, I guess you could. But I would say private sector just tries to find ways to survive and creates new logistical chains. But there are no miracles, and the question whether we are stepping on the rakes of the old USSR, it comes to the answer that, yeah, we actually are repeating the same thing. And one more point about sanctions, not so much sanctions themselves, but as an exchange of blows with the West. Now, on the backdrop of visit of Putin to China, we still have a lot of financial transactions blocked with China. And the biggest story of that is related to military-industrial complex, because specifically that hits electronics. All high-tech supplies are being sanctioned, and those are the ones that China does not release payments on and does not allow transactions to happen. So that's curious how that will affect Putin's military production, because China is the main supplier for all these technologies of dual use to Russia. Another story is that Biden signed another bill about prohibitions of Russian uranium imports. This is a very serious story for several reasons. It will not be enacted immediately. They are creating a certain capacity on their own and finding additional logistics to replace Russia on this market. And Russia was a big supplier because Russia had a lot of enriched uranium that it was bringing to the world, to the global market. But this bill already signed, and that's about $1 billion a year that Russia was making on this market. And this is the main thing why Rosatom was staying afloat on, because it is heavily subsidized already by the budget, and they're getting tens of billions of rubles annually. So if that additional profitable component of $1 billion a year would be gone, then Rosatom will be the next one after Gazprom that will become a losing company. They'll become non-profitable following Gazprom. And America already enacted this bill. Europe is next in line. They're still buying some of the fuel from Rosatom, but they have transferred a lot of their supply lines to buying fuel from Westinghouse, and they will start refusing to buy that from Rosatom. Now, if you look also at the sanctions against the aluminum, copper, nickel, and other precious metals, Americans are leading in that market, and this is a serious market. This is over $20 billion of export profits. And the conversations about where else can Putin profit be chopped off, they're slowly but surely closing these different pipelines that were generating money for his budget. And generally, this is good news. What else? Central bank also pressures Western banks rather sternly, the ones that remain in Russia. and they're basically pressing on them so that they would bring plans in June, by the end of June, their exit plans from Russia. And I think Europeans are concerned with American secondary sanctions against their own European banks that remain in Russia. So this will be somewhat painful for European bank system if the United States will start sanctioning those. So that's where they're saying, no, we'll figure it out. Let's withdraw from there to avoid additional issues with the United States. And fresh news there, by the way, that Russian courts start to arrest assets of large banks that are still working in Russia, Deutsche Bank and Italian Unicredit. And I see commentary to these news, so one should not be putting a carriage in front of the horse. Arrest does not mean that the money is being taken away. This is additional measure while the case is being reviewed, because the plaintiff on those cases is Russian alliance of Rothenberg. There was a Baltic natural gas liquefying facility that they were building together with Gazprom. And after the beginning of this full-scale war with Ukraine, the Western manufacturers of equipment have left, like German company Linde that was providing complex machinery for that factory. And these banks were the guarantors. Deutsche Bank and Unicredit were the banks guaranteeing this deal. And that's why Rothenberg is suing them, trying to sue them as guarantors of that deal since those companies left. Not given that he'll win, and arrest for now is just freezing the assets. But we'll see what ensues. It's also rather comical that these banks were telling for a while that we cannot leave Russia because Russian business is very important. It's the basis of our profitability. And they did not leave on their own volition. Now that means Putin will join with Rothenberg and Gazprom and will just take their profits and their assets from them. We discussed that topic before, Michael, but it's very ironic that this thing is ending for them like this. And another aspect to this sanctions and near sanctions news, it is not directly related to them, but it's funny. RBC Auto News is publishing information that there are more cases in court where people were buying vehicles on parallel gray imports. So what a parallel import is, when you're buying a car that was officially purchased under somebody else's name and was brought on that left gray scheme. So that somebody that it was purchased on the name for is now suing those who are driving vehicles, saying that I am the actual owner of the vehicle. So this is funny how this gray system is collapsing. This actually puts the whole schema of parallel imports under the global threat, and at least on the bigger goods, consumer goods like vehicles. And these machinations, those mafia elements making money on them are making money twice. That's why it's a good warning to those who are trying to use these schemas in Russia, that very likely you'll be losing your money and your vehicle. As for oil, Brent got a little higher to 83.39 per barrel. And why? There was some better news about inflation coming from United States, and even there were some expectations that Federal Reserve System will be lowering their rate. I don't think they will. And there were also a little bit of good data about the China economy coming up last week. So as you see, it fluctuates, right? The oil is not too expensive yet, but I think that this coming week we'll see the oil market trying to heat this story up a little. This is the key question for Putin, because we talked about the deficit. This is the only easy solution for them if the oil would go higher. I think Kremlin puts a lot of aspirations on this development, but for now it is still slow. It is not going high. After all these attempts to lighten it up, to bring it higher, it falls back. Ruble entrenched a little bit this week, and I've seen an interesting chart last week. It was in Bloomberg, and I think it deserves our viewers' attention. Russia is number one, but this is the chart of volatility of currencies for the last year. I want to congratulate all citizens of Russia, right? We came first before Turkish lira and Argentinian peso, and Russia is on the super remarkable first spot on the volatility of currencies, which, ruble keeps jumping left and right because it is not anchored to anything, and the economy is in shambles. So the main threat to ruble, I think, are all these exchanges, all these payments that are stuck in China, and Putin failed to unblock them with his visits, so we can continue monitoring this story. Last thing I wanted to mention is prices for real estate, and here everything is frozen and is awaiting the drop down. There are a lot of signals coming now that from regions in Russia that secondary real estate market is going down price-wise. And another interesting news that in Moscow, the initial price is not being lowered, but during negotiations, when the customer refuses to pay the price, heavy discounts are being offered. So you can see the numbers here. Nominally, secondary real estate market had grown 0.2%, but in many bigger cities, it went down significantly by actual percentages. So I think if the economy is on the cooling phase now and the cooling trend, that Belousov's macroeconomic center also confirms, everything will just expedite. All these processes, we'll see them soon. And one more thing I wanted to add at the end, continuing that situation of a toad, a viper, and spiders in a single can. Central bank is pushing back on the decision of taking away the minority shareholder stock from Solicom factory. So this is a legal clash between General Prosecutor's Office, FSB interests, and Rosatom's interests, who wanted to take this factory for himself, and central bank. So this is a conflict between different branches of Putin's power that is now shifting into judicial sphere. I'm not expecting much news this coming week, but I will probably be able to find a few curious news from my stashes that I haven't talked about, and we'll see you a week later. Thank you so much, Vlad, and we'll see you in a week. Good luck. Till later. Thank you.
Спасибо, всем до встречи.